Welcome to the London Commercial Offices podcast with me, your host, Steve Berridge, Managing Director at Fidgins Cost Management. This is a podcast where we share the stories, career paths, lessons and insights from some of the industry's most influential people. Anything contained within our podcast should not be considered professional advice, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe or follow buttons to ensure you don't miss any of the amazing guests we've got coming up. It also really helps us grow the show. Thanks. Today I'm joined by Paul Arad from Acrylicize, an organisation that helps clients harness the power of art and creativity, enabling people to fall in love with spaces. A team of 30 plus now operating from London and New York, with an offering including global branding, bespoke artwork, wayfinding and lighting. They bring a unique perspective to the attention of their clients. I've worked with Paul in the past and was blown away by the ideas that they brought to the table and the final installation, so it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Paul to the show.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to chatting further.
Excellent. So look, I'm looking forward to digging into Acrylicize, particularly how and why you launched the business and actually how that business has changed over the past 21 plus years, particularly given the changing commercial landscape that we've been in more recently. Obviously, you'll know from previous episodes, we like to go right back to the beginning for our listeners, just so because they may not know you, so we let them know how you tick. So let's go back to you as a child. At school, were you always, I'm going to say, creative?
Interestingly, I was actually quite an academic kid from 11 sort of onwards in those early secondary school years. And I enjoyed doing such things as art and design and technology. But to be honest with you, the path that I feel the education system took me and takes a lot of people is to not put a big value on creativity. It was kind of like, this is what you would do in between maths, English, history, etc. So whilst I do feel I had creativity within me to explore, that wasn't really the journey I went on. It was much more down the more traditional arts subjects.
So art in its raw form wasn't really part of your kind of early school?
No, not really. I started the business with James, who is my business partner and very much the creative force of the studio. So interestingly, my journey was much more on the sort of business commercial side. And I suppose at school, those were things that I was interested in doing things. I was leading many clubs and involved with things where I felt that actually the things that you look at now in terms of leadership and bringing people together, being quite, I suppose, confident in that realm was something that I always felt quite comfortable in. And interestingly, I think one of the biggest challenges of any creative business and studio is how you balance that creative and that commercial, how you take amazing creativity that can be left to do its thing, but also make sure that it has the right vessel and it can make money and it can do all the things that a business needs to do in order to support itself and grow. So for me personally, I've always enjoyed creativity. I actually found great outlets for that at school and growing up. But as I sort of mentioned, I don't think the educational system really supports that or really encourages that as a viable career path, which I think is really interesting in terms of what we are focused on now. And I'm sure we'll touch on in terms of our commitment to education, younger talent, and helping that journey that so many, I think, miss out on and don't get the creative sort of confidence and ability to explore further.
So was it the traditional sort of educational route that you went through? So school into...
I actually went, A-levels, and I studied business management up in Manchester, which I dropped out of after a year and decided to do history instead. I found the business side pretty boring, actually. Sort of in the textbooks, I think by nature, I'm much more of a doer than a thinker in terms of, getting into that kind of detail. And James, who I'd actually known since around 12 or 13 years old, was always kind of the person that stood out in our group as a bit different in terms of being so creative. And it was quite inspiring. So I think that when...
So you were school friends?
We were school friends, yeah. So we always had a really great connection. We were, always just had a very fun and, solid friendship before we started the business, which I think was a great foundation for it. And I think there's something there that when we were at university, James had an idea to explore this further.
And were you at separate universities?
We were at separate universities, yeah. James was studying contemporary arts and I was studying history, as I mentioned. And James was like, I've got an idea to do something. And apart from a very short stint of 4 days employment post-uni, me and James then joined forces, and we kind of went from there, really.
So was that during uni, or had you finished, got your degree, and then you decided to launch?
So as part of James's final year degree show, he had basically produced these artworks on panels of acrylic, essentially with sort of standoff bolts, and that was sort of presenting artwork. Bear in mind, at this time in '03, iPod had just launched. The whole look of the aesthetic of design at that point, I suppose, in the art world had very much moved on from wrapped canvases and traditional frames. So the proposition here was, hey, this is something which is much more modern, much more versatile. Basically, all his pieces sold out at uni, and he was like, right, I think I'm going to take this further and see where it goes. And to be honest with you, I left uni with not really much of an idea of what I wanted to do, and I think which, you know, a lot of people find themselves in. There are some traditional routes, and I think that again, some educational routes, certainly doing something like history, very popular options are law, property, finance. I just didn't really have a particular passion for any of those things. And what I was passionate about was creating things and making things happen, and just kind of where to put that energy. And so when James said, hey, I've got this product, no idea where I'm going to go with it, but I know that I need to do something creative, and I can't imagine myself going into sort of a more traditional sort of office creative role. That's kind of where it all started.
What was the business model at that time then? So James, as an independent artist producing work, it was as much about the work as the medium that the work was on, and selling that directly to
Well, interestingly, the first thing I did was went down to all the galleries in Mayfair, literally went door to door saying, hey, I represent this artist. So it was more in kind of, I'm representing James as an artist. We've got this really great product and materiality. And as I may perhaps naively thought,
how many would you like to buy?
Yeah, exactly. But, who are you and where have you come from? And, why should we, be interested in this particular artist? And it was very quickly realized, okay, this isn't the route that we should be going down. I think what it also did was massively open our eyes to a lot of the challenges and potential issues that the art world has, which is quite inaccessible, very elitist, and a huge gulf between, I think when we first spoke to people about, do you want to bring art into your space? There's a perception that that's sort of a painted canvas or something that is much more sort of be seen in, one of the, cultural institutions. And very quickly there was this realization that there's this massive gap in the market of great creative businesses or should I say businesses that sort of value creativity in the commercial sector. And we started then to sort of approach those sort of organizations to say, well, look, actually in your offices and your meeting rooms, what are you doing at the moment? It might have been, an existing collection they might have had. It might have been things that they've just sort of purchased more randomly. And we came along and said, well, look, we can actually put anything onto this acrylic canvas. It's really modern, it's fresh, and we can kind of tell a bit of your story. And that's sort of how our journey sort of went in that kind of direction. And in fact, I grew up in Wembley, and at the time Wembley Stadium was being rebuilt. And I always remember me and James drove down there when the towers were still up. They were literally just getting knocked down, and we were kind of like, we got to get in there. And through a number of ways and knocking on doors and whatnot, we managed to get a meeting with the Wembley committee. And that was kind of the first major project we did. I would say up until that point, we had done a few different offices here and there. It was literally going through a phone book, calling up, developers and saying, you've got lots of blank walls. Is there anything that, we can do to help with? But it was very much focused around this acrylic canvas. That was it was more, if anything, sort of a product-based business at that point.
What was the kind of, if you can say, the sort of the fee structure around that? So it was a case of, look, we'll come in and we'll install these acrylic pieces within your offices. We'll either, let you pick the artwork, or we'll help you pick the artwork for those acrylics. And then is that kind of a one-off? Was it a one-off sale? Was it more of a monthly, subscription, or an install and remove kind of fee? I mean, we're talking 21 years ago.
No. It was very much a case of,
early days, whatever you want to pay us, we'll take it. That'll be great.
Essentially, I mean, funnily enough, when it came to Wembley, we put a pitch together, and I actually got the pricing totally wrong. I basically, our proposition to them was, we're going to put all these artworks around the perimeter of the stadium, around club level, main concourse. and here's a cost based on our material costs that we would essentially, mark up and then charge for our creative time to put it all together. But it was all based around imagery that was part of their collection, and they didn't actually own all those images. So we went to the owners of the images and tried to strike a deal so we could go back to Wembley and say, hey, our proposition is all of these artworks, plus we've taken care of the licensing. Now, obviously, 22 years old, I had no idea about licensing. I thought we had a deal, went to Wembley and basically said, look, we can deliver all of this. I think if I look at it now, I'd obviously would have had the benefit of experience to realize that there's absolutely no way it would be that cheap. It was an interesting, probably the first major sort of lesson in business, which was I kind of went back to them very openly and honestly and said, we've misquoted this.
So you won the commission.
So prior to winning it, I said, look, before they were very interested in working with us. We were a local business, at the time we were based in Harrow on the Hill, and we were incredibly passionate. And even our pitch to them, we spent weeks on, roped in, a mate who was doing a film school to try and put a whole piece together. We still have that pitch now, which is always quite interesting to look back on. But I think that I think they respected the efforts and thought we could be a really good sort of add to the overall experience. But it was just an interesting lesson in terms of how to actually deal with clients when you do sort of things might not go the direction you want them to initially. Anyway, long story short, they were like, yeah, no worries. We didn't think that was the right pricing anyway, and we ended up winning the project. And we actually at the same time were pitching on the Emirates Stadium because it was the same architects, and we actually won and delivered that prior to finishing Wembley. So there were some delays on the stadium, but that was kind of really a moment that took us from so there was only two, I think maybe three of us at that point, but to doing two sort of major projects. And at Arsenal, we also did a series of light boxes, and we kind of took this craft of the acrylic canvas and
started
to evolve it, because we very quickly realized that, okay, this might be great for some individuals, but I think we can actually add a lot more to our offer. And fundamentally, that was around, which is still true today, this element of bespoke artwork and bespoke art schemes for the spaces that we work in. So that was probably the sort of, I suppose, the biggest turning point. And that was only about 18 months of starting the business from uni. So it was a really quite significant moment for us in terms of the confidence, the self-belief, also the naivety that you have at that age, to go on and take on those challenges and believe in yourselves to take the next step, really.
And at that point in time, did you have significant competition, or was this quite a unique offering in the market?
Interesting question, in that there was a couple of printers in the UK that could do what we needed them to do, and essentially apply images to a thicker substrate. But very quickly, as technology advanced, we started seeing this pop up everywhere. We actually had a concession in Selfridges for a short period where you would come in with your photo and that would transform onto the acrylic. But again, even that kind of service, if you jump to today, you could take your image and get it print on absolutely anything and whatnot. So it was really interesting for us to explore. And I think one of the big lessons was, we dabbled in retail, commercial. We were kind of trying to see where this would
still validating the business model, I suppose. Yes, you've had two successes in terms of stadiums. Is that going to be your main focus, or as you say, are you going to split across multiple sectors?
Exactly, and also I think that fundamentally the market kind of dictates, right, what they want and where the value is. And we didn't know that. You might talk to people, but you also got a very small data pool that you're having that dialogue with. So I think that's interesting in terms of how it helped us realize actually what people are really looking for is to make their spaces much more personalized to what they're about. People don't necessarily just want to stick their mission statements up on a wall, but they want to tell a much deeper story and connect people with the overall business, the mission, and get their clients excited about what they do. And that's kind of where we felt what we were doing and where we were developing that would be of real value to the people working for, plus a lot of fun. Like we were, at that point, we were like literally hand making artworks in, my flat and all sorts of places. In fact, a project that we have recently won in the last week or so was one of those clients that I remember roping in partners, family, friends, to literally hand make a piece for reception artwork that went into the West End in 2011. So I think it was part the market and part sort of our energy and excitement about creating bespoke artwork and expressing ourselves in that truest form and bringing clients on that journey. And I don't think that at that point there was much of that going on. So from a competition point of view,
the technology was there from a competition point of view, but the service.
Correct. Yeah, that element for sure. And also what we were doing in terms of this acrylic canvas, very quickly within 2-3 years, we were like, okay, this is not going to have legs long term, because all of a sudden, all these print shops had the ability to do it. High street stores were having the ability to do it. So I remember getting a call and someone saying, well, you're charging this, why? I can get it here for that. And I realized, okay, you know what? It's
a commodity now.
Exactly. Yeah. So where we really wanted to put our value was on our ideas. That's what we believed that we had over and above. And also, I suppose the service, we were very sort of customer focused, sort of going over and above everywhere that we could. And so the business sort of then transformed, I would say, around sort of 2011 to 2012, when we actually moved to East London, to much more of this sort of full service. We will come in and forget the acrylic thing, but we can design any artworks for you within your space. As part of our journey, we had met a lot of artists and photographers and just various people that actually we were using their artworks and putting them onto the acrylic canvas, and that was part of that offer. So that's also sort of the basis of our curation service, which is something that we have developed over the years and a big part of our service offer now, where we bring other artists into the projects that we're working on. It's kind of that trajectory was getting more and more bespoke and adding layers to that offer.
Just out of interest, from self-interest really, if so, you obviously enjoy working with up and coming artists. There might be established artists. If you think that some of the work that they do is a good fit for a particular client in a particular space, how does the finance work around that, in terms of, obviously that artist wants to get paid?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be different from job to job, but in high level terms, how does that typically work in the market?
Well, essentially we have a charge for our fees and our service to curate the space. And typically on those projects, there's multiple elements that we're doing. So we'll put a design fee to bring all those components together. From the artist perspective, we try and ensure the artist gets the lion's share of the work that they're selling. They'll have a market value for their work, and then there'll be sort of a resale price, which is often for people like ourselves or galleries, etc. So that's where predominantly the artists make their money, and we will make a small sort of commission on top of that. But I think the traditional gallery model has a much higher percentage of take from the artist. Obviously, they're putting the work up, selling the work, managing that process. We kind of view it differently, because that's our main service offer, is kind of our people and the design elements that are put to the project. So I think in that context, it works very well. The other thing we do in terms of just from an artist perspective is, and currently in our space in both in London and New York, we have artist residencies. So we actually have artists come in, use a space for 3 months at a time, 2 artists for each quarter, where they're given the space for free and materials and everything else. And we also put on an exhibition at the end of that residency. So part of that is really to help build, and we're in our sort of second year now of doing that. And it's been really inspiring, mainly going back to what I said at the beginning, which was around making art more accessible and trying to help other creatives on that journey from, I think I'm a really talented artist, but how do I go from there to actually making this a career?
A career.
And it's something which fortunately I think is being valued more. But I suppose in terms of your point about fees, I think it's twofold. It's one, making sure artists do get the right level of pay, but most importantly, giving them some of the intangibles, like even being in our space and chatting to the project managers or the sales team, and just like, okay, that's really interesting. Amazing the amount of artists that we might speak to and didn't realize that there's a whole market of selling their work to commercial clients, residential clients. So I think just generally as an ethos and a mission for us, that's sort of very much at the core. It's kind of where our journey took us. And I think that there's such an underestimation of the importance of creativity to solving problems. And I'm not just talking about making offices or public spaces look great, but just way beyond that. And I think that the more that the younger generation and the current generation are aware of that and tap into that and see that value, I think that it makes the world genuinely a better place. And I think that's sort of part of what inspires us day to day.
So we're roughly 2013. You've essentially now set up shop properly and in the London market, and that must have been around the time that we worked together.
Yeah, in fact, I recall our first major client we had in our new space. We moved into Shoreditch around just before the Olympics. It was quite an exciting time in London, and we started working for Heinz Ketchup Heinz out in Holland, and we did sort of a very large sort of feature brand experience for them in their innovation centre. At the same time, we worked together, Cola doing their space in London. And I think that was also a really interesting turning point for us as a business, because we went from putting essentially a picture on a wall to actually we're now involved in sort of technology and lighting and fabrication at another level, which completely widened our fabrication pool. All of a sudden we needed a project management team, because I was quite aware of my own shortcomings in terms of project management and where we needed that skill set in the team. We needed more technical capability within the studio. So the team grew steadily, but from around 5 of us that moved into Shoreditch, and we sort of quickly became 20 over the next few years when those kind of projects really started to open us up to another market.
A quick 15-second pause in today's content to tell you about the amazing work we do at Fidgins. We're a small but powerful team of cost consultants based on Oxford Street and focused on the London commercial sector. We help project managers and end users successfully deliver a vision for their projects. For our smaller schemes, 10,000 square foot and upwards, we offer a neat one-stop solution covering PM, CM and EA roles, which is particularly well suited for fast-paced, budget-constrained projects. We also work with a range of brilliant project managers on larger office fit-outs where we solely provide cost management services. These currently include 2 exciting large occupier schemes, both with build costs in excess of 20 million. Whether you're an end user, an asset manager or a project manager, our only rule is that you're nice to work with, because life's too short to not enjoy your day job. So if you want to find out how we do things differently, send me a message on LinkedIn and we can have a chat. Now, back to the show.
We also realised that our routes to market were different than previously. So we would be working much more with architects, whereas previously it was more sort of design and build firms, the scale of the projects. And at that point, it was typically more architect-led in terms of the larger schemes. We found project managers to be a great source of, introductions and commercial agents and various other things. So I think the business sort of definitely changed at that point. For me and James personally, it hit our 30s. We were, growing up a little bit and building families and whatnot. And therefore it was sort of just a really, really interesting and exciting time for us as a business.
So in terms of, you mentioned sort of how you win work, and that was how I figured it was nowadays in terms of mainly through architects, as an extension of their service. Do you find your appointments are typically direct to client, or do you find yourself typically appointed as a sub-consultant to a design firm? How does that typically work for you guys?
Typically the way the model tends to work is that a lot of the architects we work with will refer us to the client. They don't tend to hold the contracts, which they don't tend to do for a number of sub-consultancies. Sometimes it might go that way, but typically we will end up going client direct. And I think the reason for that is that our goal was to kind of grow those client relationships and those client accounts on a global basis. A couple of years after, so in 2016, we actually set up in the US because we were working for a US business in the UK who just set up their headquarters here. We got on really well with the CEO, and he basically offered us an opportunity to work on the West Coast for some of his projects, which at the time we thought, okay, well, this feels too good to be true. Let's just roll with it. The good thing was we had, I think, the buy-in of a client who knew that we weren't based in the US. We weren't trying to pretend to be anything we weren't, but really believed in us and really believed in, the work we had done for him here. And they were just at that perfect point of how to tell their brand story in their spaces globally.
So obviously, the London market really well, and that there is a gap for the service that you're offering and demand for that. How do the two markets compare, particularly back at that point in time? London versus New York and the West Coast?
Well,
Similar markets, completely different?
I think that the US have been, I think, quite pioneering, certainly on the West Coast, in terms of how they approached office design, much more campus-based scheme. So therefore, you had a different sort of just stack to a building. And I'm predominantly talking about some of the larger tech firms, which became sort of a core sort of client base for us for the next, and 5-6 years and to this day. I think that the likes of Google were, pioneers to, some extent in terms of how they approach those spaces. I would find we'd be sat in meetings and be like, we don't want to go totally Google, but we all of a sudden realize that we can't just kit out offices with grey carpet, white desk. We need to do something else. I mean, that might have been for some, we need to put a table tennis table in. For others, it might have been, no, actually, we want the experience to be much more immersive. But I think that the US kind of did lead the way, certainly on the West Coast in that respect. So I think when we started looking at these West Coast projects, we weren't having to sell, inverted commas, in the same way we would in London. I feel like in London, it took a bit of time for people to say, well, okay, why should I've got a budget for this project. Why should I budget for art? Or
you're kind of making them aware of the problem and then trying to sell a solution to the problem.
Exactly. Whereas if you jump forward to today, I think everybody is trying to figure out, how do I make my space unbelievable? Because whatever your policy is about people in the office, I think people realise that there needs to be much more of a pull to bring people in. And that in turn, not just for amenities, but I think the overall design, it's just the experience that I think we have of chatting to our clients and employees is very much, that's the demands of the spaces that they work in now is completely different to it was then. So I think that the US were a bit ahead of that curve, and largely due to the hyper growth of tech and therefore the kind of employees they were looking to bring on board. Also, as we all know, the age of the owners of these businesses, of the employees, had drastically fallen to the more traditional giants of industry. And I think that was also a big part of that. And I think that whilst there was a tech revolution in the UK as well, I think that followed slightly after the US. Essentially, it was a lot of those firms coming over here, which ironically sort of helped us from a growth plan. So we started working over there on the West Coast, and then you had clients such as LinkedIn, Spotify, Amazon. We actually worked on their London headquarters, but it was very easy for us to then say, well, actually, we've got a US team. And they said, okay, well, we've got one London headquarters. They obviously had other offices they were developing over the UK, but we have 3 buildings that we're currently, working on in the US that are 5 times as big as they are here. So for us, that was kind of where the big opportunity was essentially helping create this global, not just delivery, but also strategy, helping clients with how you make all your work environments feel as part of one, have a local flavour to them, as well as being part of a bigger story.
That leads neatly into what I was about to say. So in terms of, let's say I'm a client, let's say that I have an idea, I know I want something. In terms of your approach, you personally, you as a business, from day one when you get to sit down with a client, very high level, what's the kind of the approach that you take? What's the kind of the journey that you're looking to take them on?
Every client's set up slightly differently and has a different group of individuals who make up that committee. I think the ones that are on some of the larger tech firms, so I think Spotify is a good example. We worked for them in London, but when it came to working with the US and World Trade, they had 16 floors of basically empty walls. They had moved in, but not really done that layer to it. And the first thing we did was go over and meet their creative and brand team. With a lot of those businesses, there is unbelievable brands, unbelievable thought and strategy that's gone into obviously that look and feel. So understanding from their point of view, getting those guys on board and getting all their input and insight was fundamental. That led into sort of a strategy piece. So before we did anything, before we started thinking about what individual ideas might look like, just how do we want to use the building? How does it want to flow? What do we want the experience of people to take away from visiting? And when you're talking about a building with, so many different floors and different departments, that overall strategy was really crucial. For me, it's all about being as much as you can in the same room with the client. We have a great space in London and New York intentionally to invite that kind of collaboration, get clients actually out of their space and thinking about, things more abstractly and in a different environment. And it becomes incredibly collaborative. And to be honest with you, we sort of very openly ask clients, like, how do you want to be involved? And some, hey, I'm doing 3 other jobs at the same time and we just need to get this done. Correct. And then there are others that like, no, actually we're an in-house workplace team. And this is like everything that we're here to do and support, all the way to clients that say, actually, I've got an idea, kind of know where I want to take it, but I'm not quite sure how to realize that and bring that to life and then implement that. So part of our service is not just coming up with good ideas, it's actually how that translates in the physical space, how that literally ties in with all the architectural elements and the mechanical and engineering components. And there's a whole, as you know more than most, so much coordination that needs to happen. I think that's sort of the real success of a lot of these projects, is not just sitting with clients and generating amazing thoughts and ideas, but how that can really infiltrate into the scheme and get built and also have a legacy. Because I think so many of these things, the way we think about the work we do is not just great day one, everybody's in and the space is great and nice photo shoot and everyone's happy. But what happens 6 months down the line? How do these things sort of constantly in some way change, update and keep fresh and keep creating insights for people that, feel that it's not just about that first, experience.
That's interesting. So there is potential of a kind of an ongoing relationship with you guys to keep that space fresh for the next 6 months, 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's 2 main ways that we tend to do that. One is in terms of the kind of artworks that will be created. So there might be elements of interactivity. There might be elements of changeability within the artworks themselves. So that gives a space the ability to flex and change with time. That's a good example of a project we just completed in Finsbury Square for Inmarsat, which is a huge lighting installation on the corner unit that they have, and it's constantly changing. I know for Pride they had a whole sort of color wave, and so you can create spaces that actually can adapt and change with whatever the organizations may want to do with that. And I think the other way is bringing in to workplace, which I think is much more common and much more of value to clients, where you can bring elements into the space. So for example, if we finished a curation project, we've got 15 different artists that have got work throughout the space. We'll host events for the client where the artists come down. There's great for them to talk about their work, great experience for the artists, great for the employees to get that kind of insight about what actually went into all of this. I think that's the other thing. A lot of people feel like, great, we've moved into a new office. Yeah, it all looks great, fabulous. But actually, there's so much work, as you know, from architects, from the client, from so many teams that go into that to bring that story to life, to tell some of that. And I think in part, but certainly for artists, that creates a legacy for them. They're very proud of creating work in spaces that are going to be enjoyed by others. It helps their own personal portfolio. So there's lots of ways that we do that. And in particular, that's is probably one of the key areas of growth for our studio at the moment, which is around sort of the activation of spaces through art. I think offers such value. And even if I jump back to my own experiences of feeling a bit creative, but not really knowing what those outlets were, I think the more you bring that into businesses, irrespective of what the sector is, I think that can be a great inspiration to people and tap into other parts of their thinking processes that ultimately result in much better output for everybody.
And I think it's on both sides, on the artist side, but also the employee side in the office, because I'm guilty of it. Walk around a nice office, look at a piece of artwork, yeah, it looks nice, and you don't stop and really understand why it's there. And I think if you can help the teams and the employees understand why it's there, it helps feed back into the vision that was there in the first place as to why that was designed, to go back to their core brand.
I mean, fundamentally, at the core, I do believe that all of us in different ways are looking to connect, right? We're looking to connect with our audience, with our staff, with our, colleagues and all sorts. And I think that what's happening more and more is that the environment, your home essentially, from a work context that you're sat within, is an unbelievable way to do that. And there's lots of different elements I think traditionally have been, right, well, let's have an office in this kind of area because it's going to have lots of benefits and make people think X, Y, and Z. And then obviously how the space is designed. And I think it's one of the most underrated components of our brand experience, all the rest of it. It's the thing that hits you in the face as you walk into an area, and the projects that we worked on, I think is a really good example of that, where okay, I get it. I get what these guys
I
are
know where
about.
we are. I
Yeah.
know what you believe. I know what you stand for.
Absolutely.
Instantly.
And I think it's such a wonderful opportunity, like genuinely for people, when we're chatting to clients and we're like, okay, well, what are you actually trying to do? Well, we do all this amazing stuff here and we do this great, we've got this great social initiative but you come in, it's just sort of a very blank space. That's sort of, it's quite difficult, I think, to do that in the style of the furniture or, what lighting features you've got. But I think that what you put in and around the space, and I think that's sort of, the very much the realm of which we like to play, it's just like, it's a great tool to use. It's a great value add for businesses, as opposed to when jumping back to when I was saying about, when we first were getting going, it was like trying to convince somebody to not have a white wall. It was like, well, we should put something there because it looks blank. It's completely flipped. And now it's, how can we bring some real, value, some experience, some immersive element to what we're doing, which, I think if that results in happier places that people want to come into, if that helps to connect people and connect, visitors and clients and staff, I think that's when we feel like, a project's been really successful.
What's your plans for the future of the business? We don't need to look too far ahead, but for the next 5 years, are there particular things that you'd like to double down on? Are there new sectors and initiatives that are kind of, you're flirting with but haven't yet jumped in on?
I would say there's two core focuses for us at the moment. One is our US business. We've done really proud of the work that we've done over there for some unbelievable clients who are incredibly supportive of what we do and what they're trying to achieve. It's a really interesting marketplace. It's very different, I think, in some ways to London. And I'm not just talking about New York or San Fran, but, the US as a whole.
So you are finding now, obviously you're in New York, you were doing a huge amount on the West Coast. Is that now filling in the gap in between and there's other stuff?
Yeah, so essentially our sort of journey went from west to east because practically during COVID, we had two very large projects in New York that we had to have a presence on the ground for. And so that kind of very much sort of forced that decision. We worked in, I think, 9 different states in the US. And also in Toronto, recently just completed a project in Mexico City. And so therefore, I think it's great to have a base in New York. I think it's great because a lot of client teams sit there, but actually our reach and the work that we've done there is over 50% of it is in New York, but there's quite a bit that's outside of that state. But I think that's just a huge growth opportunity for us. I know there are more challenges there in terms of getting people back into the offices. There's a higher percentage of surplus office space, but grade A offices is selling at all-time highs in New York. So, but I believe there's opportunity because there's a shift in the market. A lot of buildings there's repurposing of, and I think that those businesses that are doing everything they can to bring people back are very focused on how their spaces look and feel. So we're finding sort of success there, and it's something which I am really passionate about and really want to help us drive forward over the next couple of years in particular. And the other key focus of ours is the art house, which essentially is the space that we're in, but is much more than that. And essentially it's more of an artist sort of agency model where we're representing the artists that I mentioned, the residency programs. We have something called Creators in Bloom, which is set up to help from an education sort of roots. We had 50 primary school kids in here last week doing a whole creative program that's been in partnership with other design firms as well, but hosted an exhibition here. And it's just sort of, it's everything that represents all the, I think, fabulous things about the accessibility of creativity, being able to help not just primary school kids in their development, but actually adults, professionals bring that creativity into their spaces. So we have quite big plans for how, as I mentioned, how you activate these spaces and big lobby spaces and workplaces to bring much more of that into the standard sort of workplace day to day. So we're really excited about that. We've had some fabulous events here over the last year and a half. Yeah, I think there's two things in particular that we're quite, I would say, doubling down on to to your
doubling down on
point.
You need to focus. Well, I think we'll get you back on next year, and we can check in and see how that's going. Paul, I've really enjoyed today. It's slightly not the norm kind of episode in terms of what we focus on, but a really interesting topic, which I hope the audience are going to get their teeth into and just get them thinking more about sort of the sector that you're in. We'll pop your details and some Acrylicize sort of project studies in the show notes. So for anyone listening that is interested, whether you are client, employee, architect, or just a financially based QS like me that wants to learn more about what you're doing, they can click on and have a look. But look, thanks for coming on. Good to talk.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
This podcast is sponsored by Fidgins, a London-based cost consultancy. Please visit fidgins.co.uk to find out more about our market-leading service and some of the amazing clients we get to work with. We're super open to guest recommendations for this podcast, so if there's anyone in the industry you'd like to get on the show, please visit the website or send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll try to make it happen. Thanks and bye for now.